Thank you, Sasha, and welcome to Complaint Management, Walking the Talk. This will be a 1-hour exploration of why and how complaint can actually work into your co-op's marketing program. And so today's agenda, over the next hour, I hope people come away with a strong understanding of the importance of managing or engaging with people who complain about your co-op with some specific deliverables and how to process a complaint, and maybe also how to become an effective complainer in your own right. But first, I want to talk about the relevant cooperative values. It's always worth taking a moment to center any of our work on the statement of the cooperative identity, which was adopted 25 years ago in 1995 by the International Cooperative Alliance, which is also celebrating its 125th anniversary. This document provides guidance to co-ops around the world on how to create a cooperative difference in the marketplace through a set of values and principles. While people generally talk about the 7 principles, our topic today rests on the ethical values of honesty and openness, social responsibility, and caring for others. Ian McPherson, who helped write the statement, wrote in the background paper, quote, "Aside from a special tradition of honesty, cooperatives have aspired to honest dealings with their members, which in turn has led to honest dealings with non-members. For the same reason, they have a bias towards openness. They are public organizations which regularly reveal to their membership, the public and governments, considerable information on their operations. Further, they have inherited traditions which have been concerned about the health of individuals within communities. They therefore have an obligation to strive to be socially responsible in all of their activities." So co-ops are not just businesses, there are social economic organizations rooted in their community, and thus they really have an obligation to be good corporate citizens. And I think that's where you see then even in the principles, it's reflected as concern for community and what that means. It's not just working for your membership, but also working for the entire community in which the co-op exists. Let's see. So in my view, complaint process is marketing. It's part of it. Marketing efforts, spend a lot of time. We spend a lot of member resources on marketing through a number of venues. The need to protect that investment and managing the complaint process should be part of that protection. The advertising and other marketing tools create an expectation for the community and the consumer. While we can't expect perfection, how the co-op responds to a mistake can either support its marketing message or destroy it. Part of this is that people who feel ignored or abused might take actions that can further affect the co-op, such as bad word of mouth, or as we'll discuss later, even litigation. Materially, the customer might leave and never spend their money with the co-op again as well. Customer satisfaction and loyalty has a long-term value to the co-op, and knowing the lifetime value of a customer can assist co-op management in underscoring the importance of keeping a customer satisfied. For example, Starbucks is, they've estimated that the gross margin for a customer lifetime value is $14,000, dollars or so. That means when someone comes into Starbucks for the first time, that person has a value of about $14,000 over their lifetime to Starbucks. Likewise, auto dealership I worked with once calculated between sales and service, when somebody comes in for their first contact, either an oil change or to look at the cars on the lot, that person is worth about $200,000 over their lifetime to the dealership. So, this is actually not, it's an interesting number to consider and think about. I'm going to put, I'll put a link in the chat later for how you can go and calculate that for your cooperative. An important aspect on refocusing the marketing on your co-op is that your co-op also needs to change the way complaints are treated in terms of complaints. This isn't to say that people shouldn't be held accountable, but if the complaint process is seen and treated as the beginning of the disciplinary process, then the co-op will inhibit reporting. Nobody likes or wants to be a snitch. So it's important that this isn't about tattling on coworkers as much as it should be about correcting a miscue between the expectations of the consumer and the delivery of service. Training and coaching is essential. Discipline should be far down the list, which I'll discuss a little bit later. So there are different avenues of complaints, and unhappy customers might complain through a number of different ways. While most of our time will be with the formal complaints made directly to the co-op, I want to spend a few minutes on the social media aspects. But first, a quick definition of a public complaint. This is a complaint that is a reported allegation made by a person who's not a worker, that they, another person, the cooperative, or the public has been adversely affected by the acts of a worker or the cooperative. These complaints can be used to, I should also mention there are a lot of what we were talking about might also apply to internal complaints, but our focus here is really people external to the organization. I mentioned word of mouth. People may simply just complain to their friends and family, and this can hurt the co-op without the co-op even knowing about it. Others might go to a rating site like Yelp or other social media, such as Google reviews, Craigslist, Rant and Rave, Facebook, the Better Business Bureau, Reddit, and these complaints can be used to vent and shame a business, but unless you're watching them, they may never reach your co-op's level of awareness, but still have a major effect on your overall business. One exercise you can do is to periodically type your co-op's name following the word sucks into a search engine and see what comes up. You can also go to some of these sites and type in your co-op's name and see what sort of reviews you're getting, and then work from there. So the rating site complaints is important to deal with. Dealing with these online sites is important, but don't obsess about it. If your co-op hasn't claimed a Google or Yelp site, it should. It should make sure it's in control of that. Often you can set up notifications without having to pay, and that way if there is a complaint or a compliment, you hear about it right away, and you can use the compliments to support your marketing. If there is an online complaint, generally don't dive in and get into a tug of war with the person. Make a general response and usually keep it to apologizing for the bad experience and ask them to call or email the co-op so that it can be dealt with properly. So don't try to process a complaint online. Get them to make a public complaint directly to the co-op so that it can go through the proper channels. Sometimes complaints are factually inaccurate online, and that shouldn't surprise anyone. And sometimes they're just misidentify your business. A lot of co-ops have very similar names. For example, there are over 7 different taxi cab companies in the U.S. called Union Cab, and none of them are connected to each other. Sometimes I would see a complaint that mentioned a business or intersection that I knew didn't exist in the city of Madison or Dane County. And if I could figure out which city, I would then respond to the person online and let them know they got the wrong Union Cab and suggest that they redirect their complaint to the appropriate Union Cab. In some cases, if it were a really crazy complaint or something, I would also ask that it be taken down. And actually, that's one of the reasons why even Yelp will take down complaints, is if you can show that they misidentified the company. So it's important to manage this so it's not sitting out there and hurting your reputation when it doesn't need to be. It can be hard dealing with social media sites, and you can actually hire firms that will take care of it for you. But a public response is better than letting it sit there by itself. And sometimes you can also just hide the complaint. So on Facebook has an option where you can hide a comment. And basically what happens when you do that is the only person that can see that comment is the person who posted it, but nobody else can see it. And that way the person feels, vindicated or whatever, but nobody's actually seeing it. So I don't know how many folks we have online right now, but I was thinking maybe we could do a quick complaint. Before we dive into the process, I want to stop and ask about your consumer experience. If someone's willing to share, raise your hand or step into the chat, and we can go through the questions. If no one does, I can share one on my own. But we've all had bad consumer experiences. If you can think of one that that resonates with you, how do you feel about it? Did you complain? If you didn't, why didn't you? And if you did complain, did you feel hurt, or what was the outcome? So give a few seconds if anyone is interested in participating or not. Okay, well, I will go on. I'll just give one of my own. So a couple of years ago, I I received a phone call from a medical provider to check in on some service and equipment that I had just been set up with. It was like a 2-week check-in, and it was a 5-minute call, and they asked me how things were going. I said, fine. And they said, well, I'm just going to do this one little tweak to help you out. And I said, that's great. And then a month later, I got a bill for $250. They never told me I was going to be charged. I felt, really misinformed about the whole situation. I wouldn't have even answered the phone if I had known it was going to be a $250 phone call. And so I did complain, and they told me that it was a legitimate medical appointment, and they weren't going to do anything. So I peeled up the ladder, and finally I got to the top of the appeal chain, and they said, no, this is a justified expense. So then I decided, they really weren't listening to me. They didn't tell me that I didn't have informed consent to that medical procedure, basically. And so what I did was I finally filed a complaint with the Office of the Insurance Commissioner. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later when we go through the complaints. And and I decided I wanted to fight it. And ultimately what they decided is that it wasn't worth their time to fight the complaint. And so they sent me a letter and saying they still agreed with their position, but out of good faith, they're going to get rid of the charge. So that was one process. And I think that's, part of it is how angry people get. And I guess, I try to avoid dipping into the anger when I'm complaining, but, and we'll talk about more of that as well, but that's, something to think about as you're going through this. And also something to think about when people complain to your co-op is, how do you feel when you complain, and try to put yourself in that position and feel how you feel, whether you feel powerless against a large corporation, which is how a lot of people will see co-ops, even though we don't think of them that way. From the outside world, many people can see cooperatives as being the sort of faceless corporation and feeling disempowered in dealing with them. So part of that is trying to also connect that humanity of the co-op model to the person complaining. So loyal customers are the ones who complain. And it can be hard to remember that sometimes when they're complaining, because they're not always going to be complaining in a way that's very productive. But, people complain for different reasons, and we can't know the intent. It's best to presume that they're loyal and they're choosing their voice to help the co-op improve. There's this whole theory about exit voice and loyalty, is that some people will simply leave and others will stay and use their voice to try to improve the organization. And loyalty is a factor in that. Sometimes loyalty is what allows people to stay to try to make the organization better. Sometimes people in their active loyalty, they're wanting to hold a company up to values, might leave and attack from the outside. So it's important to understand, though, and important to assume that people are trying to make the organization better. Also keep in mind, if there's an easy and cheap way to fix a problem, then do it. The old saw about penny wise and pound foolish is really worth remembering when it comes to complaint management. So, the value, as the screen says here, and I'll just go through it, most customers with bad experiences simply vanish. They just quit coming into your store, they quit using your service, you never hear from them again. But the ones who complain are actually loyal. They're taking time out of their day to let you know about a problem. They're giving you the opportunity to express your co-op ethics and values, their opportunity to fix operations and improve your market value, and the opportunity to align your advertising with their lived experience. So that's really a great gift that a complaining customer is giving the co-op, and that shouldn't be ignored. And so in dealing with that, there's something that we worked with at Unicab, and I think it's probably used elsewhere, but we call it the okay, let's get the head here, sorry. So yeah, how to take a complaint. Focus on the problem, not the emotions. Remain calm. Don't try to interpret the intentions. What you really want to do is find out what went wrong, but also find out what went right. So were the things they were happy about? Was it just, this one part of the day or the experience? What you really want to do is create a safe space for them, for the consumer to complain. And really keep in mind that a responsive complaint process can increase loyalty. Often what customers really want is to be heard. That's more important. And then find out what they need to have it resolved. If it's an easy, low-cost solution, then maybe that's the best thing you can do. It may be something that you really can't fix either without a massive redesign of the systems of your co-op. And if it's something that only happens 1 in 100,000 visits, then maybe it's easier just to take care of that 1 in 100,000 problem. So yeah, this is what I was talking about. I got ahead of my slides, but the 4A technique. So 4A is acknowledge, assess, alleviate, assure, right? Some of this, I won't read the whole cards, but you want to validate the upset customers. You want to really make an assessment of the situation and reduce the emotion from it. So, and you can do that by validating their answers and summarizing, making sure they're heard. That's a big part of it. Consider some alternate solutions, help the customer feel in control and pleased, and assure that the complainant that the report will actually be investigated. So explain the process and the timeline, and also explain when to get a response and maybe who's going to make the response well. And tell them if you don't hear by this date, give me a call back. Things to avoid. So definitely try to avoid patronizing terms. Things that just are going to, like telling people to calm down or things that minimize their experience. Don't try to solve past problems. Sometimes when people are complaining, they're going to bring in a litany of other things that have happened in the past that you can't control. You need to really focus on the complaint that caused them to call and focus on that one moment. And then don't make promises you can't keep. So, promising to fire people or offering refunds that you may not be able to offer, that's only going to set up a further expectation that's going to create a further problem down the road. So definitely, again, keeping it straight and simple, creating a process and getting people into the process and creating trust around that process is important. So I want to give a little bit of a summary here, or a due process. Oops, somewhere. Okay. So yeah, so internally, this means also creating a co-op method for dealing with complaints and separating the public response from an internal process. So you have the complaint process for the customer, then there should be something else for happening inside the co-op. So again, if you can just simply placate the customer, and that's fine, or people, make sure they're heard, and do what you need to do to make the customer feel valued. And if they're talking about fixing systems and it's something that the co-op can fix, let them know that their complaint led to improving operations and services. But understanding sometimes complaints aren't always valid. You don't need to make that determination when people call in. That can happen later. The workers who are being complained about deserve due process. So, finding a way to track complaints, find educational training opportunities, figure out, systemic glitches. So it might be that the problem isn't really that worker's action or behavior. It may be that there's a systemic problem in the process, and again, progressive discipline. If someone makes a mistake the first time, that probably means that it's an educational issue or a training issue. If they're not following established policy or protocols. So make sure they understand what they're supposed to be doing and try to get everybody in line. Just like you're trying to create a safe space for complainants to give their complaint, it's important to create a similar safe space for workers to respond. Acknowledging the power dynamics and the disciplinary process. People are definitely get very defensive when they are faced with a complaint about their work or behavior. I know I do when it happens. But give them that space to understand and understand that the idea is to get to the truth of the matter and to try to determine, what's really happening out there, and recognizing it may not always be because the worker failed it, and that's something. It could very well be that the system is part of the problem. Again, encouraging an educational, non-confrontational approach. So talking about this is the union cab method, and that we did. We created a public complaints team that was for years I just handled all the complaints, I should say, and what we did was we moved that to the operations team, which consisted of drivers and dispatchers, people in maintenance staff, marketing people, and managers and phone answers. And so they would hear the public complaints, and then there was a public complaints team that would help manage it. So basically, we said any member can take a complaint using a complaint form that we created. Then the public complaints team would make the initial response to the complainant, follow up on the fuzzy areas, fill out the form a little bit more. If they could, they would be authorized to refund as needed or to give vouchers if that was appropriate. And then what they would do is they would remove all the names from the report for the ops team. So the operations team would get a complaint and they wouldn't know the name of the complainant and they wouldn't know the name of the worker. All they would know is how many times this complaint or type of complaint the worker had in the last 12 months. And they would also have the write-up from the worker's response as well. So they would only be looking at really the text of the complaint, maybe some notes by the PCT on filling in some of the vague spots, and then the response from the worker. And from that, they would make a decision on what to do. And that could be anything from declaring the complaint invalid to saying there's not enough information to make a determination, but keeping it linked to the worker to an education model or training, or maybe further on getting into discipline. But it would definitely take a while to get into the discipline, or it'd have to be pretty serious to get up into the discipline realm. So this is an example. I won't read the whole thing. You're welcome to, though. It'll hopefully be up here enough. So basically, this is a dispute between a nursing facility aide and a driver about loading a wheelchair into the trunk of a cab. The driver basically told the aide, I guess I'm not the professional here, when it was being challenged. And that's what kind of triggered the complaint, because the driver, and then the driver, in their response, and I should say too, it appears as this was, is that either the phone answer mentioned that, other drivers were able to do this just fine with the pedals on, and for some reason this one driver wasn't able to, and they wanted to call back. So we went through the process. The driver responded that, was a little combative, and the committee eventually decided that, this required a little bit of training. So specifically going to some of these one-day seminar courses, like dealing with customers or managing emotions. And that was pretty much the end of it. So you see this one driver had 2 complaints about behavior in the last 12 months. So this triggered a training decision instead of any other decision. If the person keeps coming back, then maybe they would get higher. And I should say that because when we started doing this, what we would notice is there would be certain drivers that would get complaints about driving, and even though we knew other drivers drove the same way, they never seemed to get complaints. And so there was definitely this a way of managing it. What this ended up doing, so in the years before we adopted the system, we would average a complaint every probably one or 2 complaints a day. And of course it's a cab company, so the phone number is on the side of the vehicle. Very easy in the era of cell phones for people to call in at the moment, say that person cut me off or whatever. So we would get 1 to 2 complaints a day. After we put this process into place, the following year it was more like 1 or 2 complaints a week. So what this actually did was it allowed us to go in and actually start really working on an ongoing training system with people and education. And complaints dropped by almost 60% for the co-op, which is pretty impressive in my mind. So I do want to talk about a cautionary tale, and this basically going to roughly keep the names and everything removed. But so a co-op worker refused service to two men, one of whom was white, one of whom black, due to feelings of sexual harassment. There were no other witnesses or participants. The passengers called the passenger, so it was a cab ride, I guess, not really hiding that information too well, called the supervisor who defended the worker and refused a complaint. And I should say, the organization, the co-ops have an obligation to maintain a work environment free of sexual harassment. So this is a very tricky and difficult complaint process. So the supervisor defended the worker, basically told the people on the phone complaining that they were the ones in the wrong, and that was it. They called back the next day to speak with the manager. The manager defended the supervisor and the worker and refuses to take their complaint. So by Monday, this happened on the weekend, the friends of the passenger had posted the co-op's logo morphed onto an image of segregation era signage. And on Facebook, so it had started to become a bigger issue than just this one particular incident. The general manager called the complainant, but by that time they weren't talking anymore. Their friends were telling them they should go and sue the co-op, and that's exactly what happened. They filed a complaint with the Equal Opportunities Commission, and during mediation settled for $3,000, no admission of wrongdoing, plus $6,000, in legal fees. Versus what was roughly a $14 sale that was denied, and I shouldn't say it's just a sale that was denied. It was also that how they were treated after when they were complaining. So here is something had gone through and talked about our policies, that we couldn't send another ride because of the claim of unsafe work environment, but that we would deal with the process and the complaint and explain it all to them and treat them, make sure that they were heard in their complaint. It might have had a different outcome, definitely a much cheaper outcome for the co-op. And it's one that also could have kept, better goodwill in the community. Because again, this is kind of definitely a tricky issue when you're dealing with different groups of people in the community that are themselves equally at different levels of oppression or so. And so the co-op has to really think about its standing in the community and how it's going to work with that. So I want to do kind of a quick run through of the complaint management process and the cooperative difference with a few minutes remaining, or the minutes remaining here before we get to any questions. I want to kind of go through to how to write a complaint. So the first thing is to relax, take a deep breath, and calm down. Don't do it in the moment. It can be really cathartic to go online and just type some screed out, or to call someone up and start screaming at them. But take your time, do some research. Going to their website, most companies have a mission statement on their website. You can check with the Better Business Bureau. You can go online and find if there's a history of complaints about the company. Again, if you're into it, you can even try to figure out the lifetime value for an average customer. That's great data to throw at them in your complaint. When you do sit down to write, refer back to the mission. Avoid anger and hostility. Avoid adverbs and adjectives. Basically, talk about the facts as you see them. Don't presume that there's an attempt there. It may be that the person themselves are having a bad day, or something was going wrong in the structure that wasn't the person's fault. Just really focus on what happened that day that made your day not work out. Tie it back to their mission statement as much as possible. Talk about the value of a lifetime customer, and so another things to avoid is, don't make threats or insults. If you really overexpand your complaint, these are all things that cause the people reading the complaint to think, well, how serious is this? Because they're making these crazy threats, and it really allows the complaint to be dismissed as raging. And if you're raging, that's not going to get you what you want. And I guess it's also worth asking, is how much do you need to go through this yourself? Suggest solutions. This could be ways to make things good by you. It might also be things that you may have noticed in their operations that could be that may not deal with your own personal event in terms of fixing it, but in the future could fix it for other people. That makes it feel like a much more stronger complaint. And then, definitely ask for a response and see what it and go with it from there. And I've used this pretty well, like I mentioned, against the insurance company and even United Airlines and, or Continental, I think it was at the time. But this can be a very effective way of complaining because people actually will really hear you and take you seriously and respond. So if there isn't a response, though, and sometimes that happens, or if there's an unsatisfactory response, then I think you have to make a decision, and that is how much time or energy do you want to spend on this? And then you might want to. There might be some really legitimate things, like with the complaint that I mentioned. If it's an issue about racial bias, that seems like it's something you'd probably want to spend a lot of time on. So you find out if there's an appeal process, and even if there isn't, if they don't have like a committee, you can always, find out who the board of directors are. Maybe there's a CEO, maybe there's a consumer advocate in the organization. If that's not available, you can go outside the organization, but it's always best to stay within the organization first until you run out of options. This is, again, part of the legitimacy of the process, that you're not trying to, play gotcha sort of politics, or you're not trying to shame them right away. You're trying to work with them. And then, if you do need to go outside, though, who else is available? So usually the Better Business Bureau will take up the cause and at least send them a letter. Again, if they're in certain industries, there's people that can help. So the Office of the Insurance Commissioner for insurance companies, they will be on your side. As I mentioned, Equal Opportunity Commission, if it's around those lines, Human Rights Commission here in Washington. There's often an Office of Consumer Protection that can also do that. And, even elected officials, if all else fails and you really, really want to do it, you can go viral. In 2009, this Canadian band, folk band, I guess, they were traveling from Canada to Nashville, and during a transfer in Chicago, people noticed the grounds crew were throwing what looked like guitars around as they were packing and reloading the planes, and they saw it was their guitars, and sure enough, all the guitars were broken when they arrived in Nashville, and United wouldn't do anything about it. They basically ignored them and just brushed them off. So they made a video called United Breaks Guitars. You can look it up. It received 150,000 views in one day. To date, it has 20 million views. It definitely shames United quite a bit, and they probably made more money off the video than they would have ever gotten from United to begin with. I would have put a link here and shown it, but it was in 2009. Unfortunately, they engaged in what I would consider, and what would probably be, it was kind of weird back then, and I think today it would be considered outright wrong. So they dress up as a mariachi band with ponchos and sombreros and fake mustaches as part of their song. So I just want to give that as a trigger warning if you're going to go and look at it. But it is an example how, they weren't even a household name, but they were still able to use their music and filming to go viral and make a larger complaint. And I think they ended up making about 3 videos out of it. So it became kind of a trilogy, which is wild. So that is my presentation on complaints as marketing. I think if we transition the whole concept of complaints as not a disciplinary issue or a operational issue, but as a marketing issue, it can really change the way we think about it. It can also really strengthen our marketing program, and it can really create that cooperative difference in our marketing system. So I'm hoping people have thoughts or questions, because I think we have like another 15 minutes left, and then we can just have a discussion too. So I'm going to stop sharing, and maybe we can open it up.
John, it looks like we have a couple questions in the chat.
Okay.
So Deborah said, I'm curious about handling complaints about discrimination. I've experienced this firsthand. When it happens with businesses, co-ops that are owned and run by friends, it's really hard to find resolution. Do you have any advice regarding handling discrimination complaints?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's kind of a much higher level of seriousness, of course. And like in the example I gave, it wasn't treated very seriously at all. You know, it's probably worth having a special committee for those complaints, people that are highly trained in how to deal with it and understanding it. One of the dangers is in discrimination complaints is charges of retribution for making the complaint, and so it is pretty important to have skilled people, and that means, you know, maybe it's a board member even is involved, as well as you know, people, you know, different stakeholders within the organization that would go to a specific training and get certification, and then really setting up a straight policy that everyone knows about, that if somebody, you know, uses these core words about harassment or discrimination, that it doesn't go through the normal process, it goes through a different process. That said, the individual, you know, who's making the complaints should still be, you know, dealt with and in a way that is human and, you know, honored, and especially if they're bringing forth something around social justice, because that, you know, that's at the core of what co-ops are, where co-ops have always been about social justice. And if we can't be that, then we don't really have a difference. And so, you know, again, figuring out what they want, and give, you know, and thanking them for giving you the opportunity to deal with it, rather than going right away to the Human Rights Commission where it becomes a public issue.
And it sounds like this person has experienced some kind of retaliation or retribution for doing something like that. That's what it looks like in the chat.
Yeah, and that's actually where co-ops really get into trouble, is when they engage in that. That's actually where the worst lawsuits are, because the courts really frown on that almost more than the initial incident.
There was a second question here, John, about the Better Business Bureau and if they are helpful in those kinds of situations, or how helpful they are.
I mean, they're limited because they're you know, they don't have a lot of formal power, and I don't think they have the money that, you know, they probably don't have even the social presence of Yelp today, but they are, you know, they are a group, and they do have a website, and they will, you know, post and rate companies, and so it's something that, even if, you know, you get a letter from the BBB, which, you know, I have, and, you know, I want to respond to it. That's something I definitely, it seems like a low, you know, level response that you can just, you know, tell the BBB what's going on, and hopefully, you know, that will be enough. I mean, it's anonymous, so the one thing, again, you would want to encourage is say, you know, we really want to fix this. Please have the person contact us directly so we can do that. But yeah, I mean, it's not like they're, you know, gonna, I mean, like I said, I would say a Yelp review would, or a Google review would actually probably be a worse review in terms of the public today, just because of social media.
And then Brita asked about situations and complaints about reverse racism or sexism. How to address this with an educational lens. Oftentimes complainants aren't interested in hearing that reverse discrimination doesn't exist.
Yeah, and again, you know, I want to stress, I mean, yeah, external versus internal are probably going to be very different. If it's external, you know, it's, you can put it through that same process of protected characteristic complaint processing and let them know that. And, part of it is how much you're going to be able to change how people think and what that process looks like. Again, people mostly are complaining because they want to be heard, not necessarily that they expect to have some major thing change. I realize now today it's a very charged atmosphere around issues of racism and claims of reverse racism, which I agree doesn't exist. But getting to the emotion of what that person's really feeling, probably what it's really feeling is they're probably for the first time feeling that they're othered in society, which is it's still a feeling. I mean, it's still a feeling of feeling othered, whether it's not whether it's real in that sense or not, but they're feeling outcast for something and that they can't control. And so trying to figure out how to navigate that emotion in place. And I think a lot of people in my sort of demographic group of older white people who have grown up in a society where we never had to think about it and suddenly now having to deal with it are having a hard time because their concept, their existential sense of who they are has been kind of challenged. And that's really what's happening more than anything else. It's not that they're necessarily bad people. It's just that they've suddenly realized that the world that they lived in has really changed out from under them. And so trying to figure out how to work with that is educational. But and I think again, just trying to focus on where do their loyalties, that if they're loyal co-op members or consumers, how can you would take that as the good spot and strengthen it and help them understand that this isn't about kicking them out. It's something else. And that it's not about them at all, in fact, right? And it's not going to be easy, and it may not always be possible. So sometimes you may just have to part company and understand that your co-op values and principles are there, and they're welcome to join in. But if they can't take that responsibility, that's the first principle of voluntary and open membership: is that people accept the responsibility of that ownership and everything that goes with it. So it's definitely a different way of looking at it. If nothing else, I hope the next time you feel a need to complain that you're very successful.